Good morning, this is Mark Dowd of Real Estate Economics. Thank you for joining us for our first webinar for year 2012. It is January, and we will be conducting private and public webinars throughout this year. Our first public webinar is this one this morning. We'll be talking about the National Economic and Housing Market Forecasts that we've set forth. We'll have public webinars about every 2 weeks during the year, as well as a series of private webinars. We did our first series of private webinars last year during fourth quarter. It was for Southern California markets, and it went over quite well. Those private webinars last about an hour, even a little bit longer, and give all kinds of information regarding employment, regarding new housing, price appreciation, regarding those specific submarkets within a given region that we expect to outperform the region during the next 5 years. Just to give you an idea as to what our next series of private webinars are going to be, we're going to cover the Bay Area, Central Valley, which we define as Fresno and surrounding counties. Then we'll go to North Central Valley, which we define as San Joaquin, Stanislaus, and Merced counties. And then we'll cover the 5-county Greater Sacramento Valley market. That all occurs during February, and we hope that you'll sign up for those private webinars. Unlike our public webinars where you can just hear them and choose them directly from our homepage, the private webinars, we ask you to register for those. There is a registration box that's right on our home page at www.realestateeconomics.com. Okay, going into our webinar that covers the national market, we've had some very good news during the past couple of months. The first really strong employment report that we received from ADP was back in November, with 206,000 jobs being created that month. In December, it was even better. We had 325,000 private sector jobs being created based upon that ADP report. We look at it a little bit differently at Real Estate Economics. To me, the most important metric that you can follow in terms of job change is year-over-year change, really comparing what the last 12 months of growth has been, comparing November of this year, of 2011, relative to November of 2010, which is the most recent data we have on a year-over-year basis. And you can see that it is quite positive during the past 12 months, again from November 2010 through November 2011, a total of 1.588 million jobs were created. We're about 1.6 million jobs higher than we were a year ago at this time. We expect those job growth numbers to get even better as we get into second quarter 2012, as we begin to eclipse the 2 million mark in terms of year-over-year job growth. Just to give you an idea as to what that job growth looks like on an industry-by-industry basis, this is what it has looked like from November 2010 through November 2011. You can see that we had positive job growth in every single sector of the economy except for a slight loss in information and a pretty substantial loss in government. Now, we talked about this before in our last national webinar. It's not necessarily a bad sign to me that we're losing government jobs. The private sector is actually doing fairly well, and as long as that continues to do well, we can afford to shed jobs in the government. We probably should be doing that. We should be doing everything we can to reduce the costs associated with a bloated government. We think that we'll continue to see those losses during year 2012 and beyond, as not only the federal government but various state governments, of which probably the most serious is California, continue to bring their expenditures in line with their revenue stream and try to balance their budgets. So this is what the most recent year-over-year job growth report looked like by industry. This is what it looked like a year ago, from November 2009 through November 2010. Not quite as healthy, though we were beginning to see fairly decent private sector job growth. Still, we saw losses in the government sector. We saw substantial losses in construction, losses in financial activities and information. So we've improved quite a bit from there. And obviously we've improved significantly from really what was ground zero from November 2008 to November 2009, where almost every sector was bleeding jobs at a horrific rate. So we have seen improvement, despite what is being said in the political arena and not necessarily exciting news all the time regarding the economy. We are making progress in terms of this recovery. The problem is that the recession was so deep. You can see how deep it was back in 2008, 2009, 2010. It takes a long time to fill that enormous hole that we dug. And so even with fairly decent job growth that we're forecasting during year 2012 and fairly decent job growth that we experienced during year 2011, it takes a long time to fill that hole. It probably won't be until 2013 and 14 that the housing market really begins to significantly improve in the best markets. And it will be even longer in some of the less desirable markets in the nation. It's because there's a lag time between market recovery and economic recovery, and it takes a long time for the economy to fill that hole that we dug. In terms of overall housing supply, obviously our construction pace has slowed way down. Year 2011 was the lowest year in terms of construction. We think that 2012 picks up a little bit, mainly in the multifamily sector, but it's still an extremely low level in terms of housing construction. It hasn't mattered much because we have so much distressed inventory still in the system that that's really making up the difference between what we're not building and what can be sold. And so that means that there's actual oversupply despite the fact that we have economic growth and despite the fact that we have very little housing construction. The excess supply is represented by an enormous amount of distressed inventory. It'll take a few years for us to get back to what really is a normal pace of construction, which occurs in 2015, 2016. In terms of the percentage of mortgage payments that are past due in the United States, we've actually had some fairly decent news in this regard. We peaked at almost 11%, which is just a horrific number that occurred back in year 2010. Since then, during the past 4 quarters, we've actually dipped below 8%, which is the first time that that's occurred since early year 2008. When this whole fiasco really began in earnest. So we're below 8% again. That doesn't mean that we're out of trouble in terms of distressed housing, but at least the trends are going in the right direction. And we are making some progress in terms of reducing the amount of past due mortgages. Our forecast regarding 30-year fixed rates is at an extremely low level right now. We're below 4%, which I never thought I'd say in my lifetime. You can actually get a fixed 15-year mortgage at 3.15% now. 30-year fixed is 3.92%. We think it has to go up as we see economic growth. But keep in mind that 30-year fixed mortgage rates are a lagging indicator. What they lag is economic growth. But as we begin to see economic growth take hold, we think that the overall trend for mortgage rates has to be upward. In terms of population increases during the next 5 years, you can still see that big bulge we have in the population represented by maturing baby boomers that occur between the ages of 55 and 74 during the next 5 years. A lot of more mature households are being created during the next 5 years. And we need to account for that and create strategies that address that, because we won't have nearly as many first-time buyers and move-up buyers as we did during the last cycle. Most of that, or a lot of that, I won't say most of it, but a lot of that will be focused on more mature housing. It doesn't mean that the demand for first-time and move-up demand goes away anytime soon, because the population within those age brackets is still very high. It's just that the population isn't growing very fast anymore in those particular age brackets. Most of the growth is concentrated above the age of 55 years. All of this information translates into the first half of our housing model, which describes overall housing demand, shown in green, relative to overall housing supply, shown in blue. You can see that the demand curve shows a lot of seasonality associated with it. That's mainly because it's largely driven by economic growth or loss, which does have seasonality associated with it. But it accounts for a lot of other factors as well. When you get a gap between the demand curve and the supply curve, it represents, in this case, where we are right now, oversupply. When that gap is in the opposite direction, we have a period of undersupply. And so right now we're oversupplied. We're off the low mark that we hit back in January of year 2010, but we're still significantly oversupplied, and it'll take a couple of years, 3 years, to really reach equilibrium again, which we think happens at the very end of 2014. That's not really the only way you can describe the housing market. However, if you just focus on overall housing supply and demand, you're really missing at least half of the story. In order to truly understand the housing market and the direction of that market, you need to understand where we are in terms of affordability. You can actually perform well in an oversupplied market if you're also significantly undervalued. That's really where we are right now in the United States. This curve, or this model, this part of the model shows that. The green curve shows where we think we should be in terms of overall price. Now this price curve is really kind of an affordability curve. It accounts for where we are in mortgage rates and where we are in household incomes and those other factors that directly impact overall housing costs. And we compare that with the blue curve, which is where prices have actually been over the past several years and where they are now. You can see the big bubble that we formed, unprecedented bubble that we formed back in the mid part of the past decade. Here we are, where the gap between affordability and where prices are now is almost as wide as where they were in the bubble. It's just that it's the opposite case. Here was the bubble, or overvaluation, which occurred between 2004 and 2008. And here we are in terms of undervaluation, which is really an unprecedented level of undervaluation, mainly caused not only by the economic crisis, but mainly by the financial crisis. The fact that banks have shut their doors to most borrowers, and it's very difficult to get a mortgage despite the fact that they're very low mortgage rates. If you can get a mortgage, that's great, but it is extremely difficult to get those very low rates. To the extent that banks begin to loosen, more and more buyers will be able to recognize this affordability and purchase new homes. And we think that there is a wave of buyers who are waiting for that to happen. Banks need to loosen it for a little bit, and there needs to be a little bit more economic stability for that to happen. But that spells for a fairly decent year 2012, a more stable 2012 than we had in 2011. And it really improves in 2013 and thereafter as we have a few years of economic growth under our belts. The banks begin to loosen a bit more and allow more buyers to take advantage of those low rates. So the overall impact of that, we think, is going to be a bottoming of price, which we think is the very lowest level that we hit is 2011. Now, nothing exciting happens in 2012 on a national basis. We're basically flat in terms of price. We'll continue to bump along that bottom in terms of price, but volume will pick up. And we think that the year thereafter, year 2013, and thereafter, we'll see appreciation. Now, even after 5 years of appreciation, by 2016, the overall prices probably will still be below where we were in 2004, but we'll be well off our high watermark that we set back in 2006. But we will see appreciation hereafter. It's just that 2012 is basically a wash, and it's fairly gradual appreciation thereafter. Some markets will heat up substantially. We think especially some of the coastal markets in California and possibly even in Florida have a good shot of making some fairly significant rates of appreciation during the latter part of this 5-year forecast. And for those of you who want those individual forecasts, we invite you to contact us directly at Real Estate Economics. We track every one of the MSAs, significant MSAs, on a quarterly basis, and we have those 5-year price appreciation forecasts for those MSAs. This is what the percentage changes looks like in terms of price appreciation for the next 5 years. Again, it's basically flat in 2012, increases a little bit in 2013. The reason there's a bit of a jump in 2014 and thereafter is because by 2014, a lot of the distressed housing has finally been absorbed. That combines with economic growth and a little bit of a loosening in terms of lending to really bump up the potential for significant sales volume, and appreciation follows, and that begins in 2014. So to summarize some of the findings that we're seeing on a national basis, we're seeing strong signs of private employment growth. The public sector continues to shed jobs. We think that that continues. This will really just create longer term stability as the government shrinks a bit while the private sector grows. Housing construction is near an all-time low. Multifamily permits have increased, but still it's very, very low levels of housing construction. Housing affordability is at or near an all-time high. There's not many buyers that can take advantage of it yet, but hopefully that increases during year 2012 as economic growth allows the banks to loosen their lending practices a bit. There's a severe overcorrection in terms of price that has already occurred, and we may never see this level of affordability again in our lifetime. So it's an excellent time to take advantage of that for those who are able to do so. But it's going to take very strong credit, and it's going to take some significant effort in terms of either refinancing or purchasing and getting a loan with regard to a new home purchase. High numbers of defaults continue, but the percentage of past due mortgages has actually fallen. It's below 8% now, and that's the first time that's occurred since fourth quarter 2008. Price changes will range between -3% and +3% during year 2012 in most areas. Most of the positive change will be in coastal markets. I think the leading market, at least in my opinion, in the nation right now is probably Santa Clara County in Northern California, the Bay Area. That's seen some fairly significant job growth. It's obviously housing supply restricted, and we've seen some very strong gains in terms of price appreciation, at least in the core in Silicon Valley, not quite as much, or not nearly as much on the fringe areas. But it has been positive there. And we think that there are positive reports that follow in other areas of coastal California. Orange County will perform well. San Diego County will perform well. Los Angeles County will be behind those. And then along the East Coast, we'll see pockets of positive growth as well. There'll still be a lot of negative or price declines, but they'll be modest in a lot of these other markets, these inland markets. Probably the one that will see the most decline in price is Las Vegas. That's going to be slow in coming back. It doesn't have the income support, and it really doesn't have the job growth yet to support a significant stabilization in the housing market yet. Transaction volume has increased overall on a nationwide basis, and it reflects the beginnings of market stability and improved economic expectations. Market improvements in year 2012 will initially be driven by undervaluation and improved consumer sentiment as opposed to economic growth. And what I mean by that is, despite the fact that we are seeing economic growth, we have to see a lot of it for a sustained period of time before it really begins to drive the housing market again. Again, we're in the process of filling the hole that we dug. As we fill that hole, as we make progress in filling that hole, more and more buyers notice that, and they notice the undervaluation of housing, and they try to take advantage of that. But it's really not economic growth that is driving the housing market during this next 12 months. It's that recognition of strong values and recognition that we're heading in the right direction. Market demand in the next cycle will be driven by mature buyers and also by younger mobile buyers. What I mean by that are those who are chasing jobs, those job growth areas who draw in those younger buyers willing to move to a new location to take advantage of job growth. A lot of those will be purchasing homes. A lot of traditional buyers will still be purchasing, but we'll see a lot of activity from the mature sector and that younger sector and that younger mobile sector. Now, there'll also be increasing interest in international buyers, which means that some of our second home markets, for example in Hawaii, ought to see some fairly decent improvements. Part of the reason we'll see those international gains is because the dollar still is so low and such a relative bargain. And some of those other international economies, especially the Asian economies, are doing well enough that they need an outlet for that liquidity and strong economic growth that we have. And they see the United States housing market as almost being a fire sale right now. So we will see increased interest from international buyers. There are a lot of other things associated with the national economy and the housing market that I could address. I'm going to leave those for another webinar. or if you'd like to call me directly or email me directly, you're more than welcome to do that, and we'll address those questions offline. Let me just share with you, we hope to continue to expand our consulting business this year. We provide residential market consulting, site-specific feasibility studies, supply and demand studies, and so on. We also have a full palette of web-based information tools. Most of the information that you've seen in this particular website come directly from our website. We hope that you'll take advantage of those by contacting either myself or any of my associates at this contact information. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you'll join us a little later on this month as John Mulville shares with you information regarding specific markets in a public webinar. And then February 8th is our first private webinar. Thanks. Bye.